She kissed a beggar to flee her ex, not knowing he was the most feared mountain man. A choir teacher runs from a life of quiet fear and, in a desperate public move, kisses a ragged man to make a scene and escape. The man looks like a beggar, dirty coat, sunburned hands. But there's a rumor. He's the most feared mountain man in the hills, a shadow people whisper about. Now she's hiding in a small town, scared, and the man she used to kiss is watching from the ridge with secrets of his own. Someone with a feared past is choosing to protect her. But why would a recluse risk everything for a stranger? Who is he really? And what will he do when her ex turns from proud face to dangerous enemy? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun caught the red and white bunting strung between maple trees, making the festival grounds shimmer with a magical glow that belied Marin's inner turmoil. She breathed in the sweet scent of kettle corn, mixing with grass warmed by the summer day, trying to steady herself with the familiar comforts of the annual Maple Bridge Festival. From the white gazebo, hymn practice floated on the breeze, familiar voices rising and falling in perfect harmony that had once brought her such joy when she directed the choir. Those notes now felt like messengers from a happier past, each melody a reminder of the person she used to be. Her hands trembled visibly as she smoothed her simple cotton dress, a pale yellow thing she'd chosen because Anton hadn't picked it out. The small blue suitcase waited in her car trunk, packed hastily that morning after she'd finally gathered her courage. Just essentials: a photo of her parents, her grandmother's hymnal, and the voicemails from her sister saved on an old phone. Fragments of memories flashed through her mind like warning signals. The sound of Anton's study door slamming so hard the hallway picture crashed down last month. The crystal plate that shattered against the kitchen wall last week, when she'd mentioned visiting her sister. The way his voice would drop to that dangerous whisper whenever she embarrassed him. Another wonderful festival, wouldn't you say? Perfect weather this year. Anton's voice made her jump, her pulse skittering like a frightened rabbit. He stood there in his perfectly pressed khakis and crisp blue shirt, working the crowd with that practiced smile she'd come to dread. All charm on the surface, all control beneath. Town council members nodded appreciatively as he passed, shaking hands and calling out friendly greetings, eager to please Maplebridge's most prominent businessmen. "My dear," he said, reaching her side with a casual possessiveness that made her skin crawl. "You look lovely today, though perhaps a bit pale. You really should have worn the blue dress I bought you." His fingers closed around her, elbow, gentle but firm, a grip that to onlookers appeared affectionate, but to Marin felt like handcuffs. "We both know what looks good for Maplebridge, Marin. Don't make this harder than it has to be. Everyone's counting on your solo." The words sent ice through her veins, freezing her momentarily in place. They echoed his threat from 3 nights ago, when she'd first suggested separation after 23 years of gradually surrendering pieces of herself. He'd backed her against the bedroom wall, his face inches from hers as he spelled out exactly how he'd destroy her reputation, her finances, her whole life if she tried to leave. "I own this town," he'd hissed, his breath hot against her cheek. "You have nothing without me. No money, no friends who would believe you, nowhere to go." Now she glanced toward her car, heart pounding against her ribcage like a trapped bird. The festival crowd pressed closer, drawn by the upcoming choir performance that had always been the highlight of Maplebridge's summer tradition. Anton steered her toward the gazebo, his grip tightening almost imperceptibly. "Time for your solo, dear. Everyone's waiting. Don't disappoint them, or me." Panic rose in her throat, threatening to choke her. Once she stepped into that gazebo, she'd lose her chance. He'd make sure she never left his sight again. Tomorrow the suitcase would be discovered, his anger unleashed behind closed doors, while his public face remained spotless. That's when she saw him, the man on the bench set slightly apart from the festivities. His jacket was stained with soot or engine grease, festival dust coating his worn boots that spoke of miles traveled. He sat alone, watching the crowd with tired eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. Without letting herself think too hard about consequences, Maren twisted free of Anton's grip with a sudden strength that surprised them both. 2 quick steps took her to the stranger's bench. She grabbed the front of his dusty jacket and kissed him full on the mouth, clumsy and desperate, a declaration of independence as public as it was shocking. Gasps erupted around them like firecrackers. Someone dropped a paper cup with a splash of lemonade. "Did you see that?" A woman's voice rang out, scandalized and thrilled all at once. "Mrs. Albright just kissed that drifter, Anton's wife." Maren pulled back, face burning with both embarrassment and a strange exhilaration. The stranger's eyes were wide with shock, a question forming on his lips that she couldn't stay to answer. Behind her, she heard Anton's sharp intake of breath, could picture his carefully maintained image cracking like thin ice, the whispers already starting around him. She didn't wait to see more. While the crowd buzzed with scandal, she slipped through the pressing bodies and ran for her car, keys already clutched in her sweating palm. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the lock, but the engine caught on the first try as if even her old sedan understood the urgency of escape. As she pulled away from the curb, the festival blurred in her rearview mirror, the fluttering bunting, the gathering dusk, Anton's rigid form still frozen by the gazebo, his perfect world suddenly upended. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but underneath the fear, a wild bubble of something like hope rose in her chest, unfamiliar but welcome. For the first time in years, she'd chosen her own path, written her own music instead of following Anton's strict arrangement. Now she just had to keep driving until she found somewhere new to plant her feet, somewhere the soil might be kinder to whatever parts of herself might still bloom. Maren's knuckles were white on the steering wheel as she headed north, away from the festival's shrinking lights. Her phone buzzed again on the passenger seat. Another message from Anton. With trembling fingers, she pulled over long enough to disable location tracking and silence notifications. The brief glimpse she caught of his text made her stomach knot. "You're embarrassing yourself. Come back now before people notice." The setting sun painted the countryside in deep shadows as she drove, golden orange light filtering through the trees like nature's own stained glass. Last week's choir practice echoed in her mind, Anton bursting in during rehearsal, his face tight with barely contained rage, his practiced public smile nowhere to be seen. "What kind of example are you setting?" he'd hissed, after dismissing the stunned singers with an apologetic wave that somehow made them feel they'd done something wrong. "A director's wife letting the sopranos go flat? People talk, Maren. Everything you do reflects on us." His voice had been low, controlled, but his fingers had dug into her elbow, leaving marks she'd covered with long sleeves for days. Us. Always us. Never her. Never what she needed or wanted or dreamed of becoming. Her fingers found her phone again, this time dialing Pastor Ellen's number. The steering wheel wobbled slightly as she drove one-handed, her pulse thudding in her temples. The pastor answered on the second ring, her warm voice instantly calming. "Ellen, I need help," Maren's voice cracked, the words tumbling out before she lost courage. "Could I use the church's caretaker cabin? Just for a few nights? I just can't go back there tonight." She swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. "The key's under the flower pot by the door. Ellen replied without hesitation, no surprise in her tone, as if she'd been waiting for this call. "I'll have it ready in 20 minutes. No questions tonight. We'll talk when you're ready. Are you safe right now, Maren?" Maren's eyes welled with tears of gratitude at the simple, direct kindness. "Yes, I'm safe. He doesn't know where I'm going. Thank you. I don't know what else to say except thank you." "You don't need to say anything else. Just drive carefully and text me when you arrive." She pulled into a side road, a narrow gravel track partially hidden by overhanging maples, to gather her essentials. The worn hymnal her grandmother had given her, pages soft with years of turning and marked with penciled notes in the margins. The silver locket with her parents' photos, their smiling faces frozen in time before illness took them both. She tucked her birth certificate, social security card, and emergency cash, slowly accumulated over months of small withdrawals, into a manila envelope, then hid her extra credit card and spare house key in the glove compartment beneath the car manual, where no one would think to look. Headlights appeared in her mirror as she merged back onto the main road, a pickup truck, following too close, its grille looming large in her rear view. Her heart rate spiked, sending a cold wash of adrenaline through her limbs. Was it someone Anton had called? One of his business associates? The truck's high beams flashed, momentarily blinding her as it edged closer, close enough that she could see the shadowy outline of a driver. Fighting panic, her hands clammy against the wheel, Maren spotted a logging road ahead, barely visible in the growing darkness. She hit her turn signal at the last second and swerved onto the unpaved track, tires crunching over loose stones. The truck started to follow, but a convoy of lumber vehicles appeared from the opposite direction, their massive forms forcing it to stop. Maren gunned the engine, the car bouncing over ruts as she pushed deeper into the forest, putting distance between them until the truck's lights vanished behind the thick tree line. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. By the time she reached the church property, full darkness had settled like a heavy blanket. The caretaker's cabin was a small silhouette against the star-speckled sky, but warm light spilled from its windows, beckoning like a lighthouse. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped the key twice before managing to unlock the door, the metal scraping against the lock before finally turning with a satisfying click. Inside, a kettle sat ready on the old stove, steam rising gently from its spout. A lamp cast gentle light over the simple furnishings, a small table with a checkered cloth, 2 wooden chairs with cushions, a narrow bed with fresh linens tucked neatly at the corners. Someone had placed a vase of wildflowers on the windowsill, their sweet scent mixing with the comforting smell of freshly laundered sheets. A folded note sat propped against the kettle, Ellen's distinctive handwriting immediately recognizable. "Stay. We'll sort the rest tomorrow. You're not alone in this. Ellen." Maren sank onto the bed, still in her festival dress, the blue fabric wrinkled from hours of sitting. Her mind whirled between crushing shame at the public scene she'd caused, Anton's practiced smile as he'd apologized to the festival committee for her migraine, and overwhelming relief at finally breaking free from the constant scrutiny. The gentle tick of the cabin's clock marked time as her breathing slowly steadied, each inhale a little deeper, each exhale carrying away some of the day's tension. For the first time in years, she was alone. Truly alone, with no one to judge her choices or control her movements. No need to text her whereabouts or explain why dinner wasn't ready or apologize for speaking too candidly with the wrong person at a community event. She curled onto her side, not bothering to change clothes or turn down the covers, too exhausted to do more than kick off her shoes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges: food, clothes, facing the town's reaction, dealing with the inevitable phone calls. But for now, In this quiet cabin with its steady lamp and Ellen's simple note of acceptance, Maren let exhaustion pull her toward sleep, the weight of 1,000 unshed tears finally releasing as she drifted off. Morning dew clung to Maple Bridge's storefronts as Maren walked down Main Street, her footsteps echoing on the damp pavement. The early hour meant fewer people to notice her, though her heart still skipped whenever a car passed, sending her pulse racing and her shoulders hunching instinctively. Outside the bakery, fresh pies cooled on wire racks, their sweet aroma mixing with the crisp mountain air. Cinnamon and apple scents wafted through the slightly open window, momentarily transporting her to safer times when such smells meant only comfort. The grocery store's bell jingled as she entered, the sound both cheerful and startling. She kept her head down, her fingers fidgeting with the frayed edge of her jacket sleeve as she grabbed basic supplies: bread, eggs, coffee, and a small jar of honey that reminded her of Sunday breakfasts long ago. Her hands trembled as she counted out cash at the register, carefully avoiding the clerk's curious gaze. The woman's eyes seemed to linger a moment too long, as if trying to place where she'd seen Maren before. "Beautiful morning," the clerk offered with a friendly smile. "Yes," Maren whispered, tucking her change into her wallet. "Just perfect." After storing the groceries in her car, carefully arranging the bags so nothing would topple during the drive back to the cabin, Maren headed to the church office. The familiar brick building with its modest steeple offered a sense of safety she hadn't felt in days. Pastor Ellen was already there, organizing Sunday's bulletins, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "I have some legal contacts," Ellen said quietly, sliding over a list of names written in her neat, rounded handwriting. "People who can help with restraining orders, name changes, folks who understand situations like yours and won't ask unnecessary questions." Maren folded the paper but didn't pocket it, instead turning it over in her hands repeatedly. The weight of what those names represented felt overwhelming. "I'm not ready for that yet. I just need time to think," she said, her voice catching slightly on the last word. "Everything's happening so fast." Ellen nodded, her eyes kind but knowing. "Keep it anyway. When you're ready. If you're ready, they're good people." Walking back through the town square, sunlight now warming the cobblestones, Maren caught fragments of conversation from a cluster of older women near the fountain. Their colorful scarves fluttered in the light breeze as they leaned toward one another, voices carrying despite their attempts at discretion. "Saved Tommy Jenkins in that blizzard 2 winters ago when the boy got lost on his snowmobile. Keeps the town's old tools up there, won't give them back. My husband says those saws belonged to his grandfather. Nobody goes up Laurel Ridge anymore, not since he ran off those hikers with that old shotgun of his." Their voices dropped as Maren passed, their eyes following her with the unmistakable curiosity reserved for newcomers in small towns. Her mind flickered to the man she'd impulsively kissed, his worn jacket smelling of pine and smoke, the surprised widening of his eyes beneath that unkempt beard. Guilt pinched at her conscience. She'd used him without thinking, turned him into part of her escape story without his permission. At the farmer's market, colorful tents set up in neat rows near the edge of the park, she stopped for a fresh loaf of sourdough. The vendor, Mrs. Peterson, a round-faced woman with apple cheeks and floured hands, leaned in conspiratorially as she wrapped the bread in brown paper. "Speaking of strange happenings," she said with a knowing look, nodding toward where the older women still gossiped, "that mountain fellow sometimes comes down looking like he's been wrestling bears, all scratched up and wild-eyed, buys supplies and vanishes again, never says more than 10 words at a time." As if summoned by the gossip, a familiar shabby figure appeared between the market stalls, weaving through the morning shoppers with practiced ease. Maren watched him move purposefully through the crowd, gathering salt and matchboxes, pausing briefly at a stand selling homemade preserves. There was nothing of the beggar about him. He paid quickly with carefully counted bills and moved with quiet efficiency, his movements economical and sure. For a moment their eyes met across the market, deep brown connecting with her hazel ones. He gave no sign of recognition, not even a flicker, but something in his steady gaze made Maren's skin prickle with curiosity. Back at the cabin that afternoon, sunlight filtering through dusty windows to create pools of warmth on the wooden floor, Maren made tea and settled into the worn armchair with her grandmother's hymnal. The leather cover was smooth from years of handling, the pages marked with penciled notes in her grandmother's delicate script. But instead of finding comfort in the familiar pages, her thoughts kept drifting to the mysterious man. Who was he, really? Why did he choose to live apart from the town that seemed so fascinated by him? What had driven him to the mountain that seemed both his refuge and his prison? The slam of a screen door startled her from her reverie, causing her to spill a few drops of tea onto her sleeve. Through the cabin's thin walls, she heard her neighbor's voice on the phone, the words coming through with uncomfortable clarity. Anton was at the council meeting, making threats about reputation and consequences. Said something about how certain people shouldn't be welcomed here without proper background checks. Ellen stood up to him. But he's got half the council in his pocket. Maren's hands tightened around her teacup, the ceramic warm against her suddenly cold fingers. The tea's comforting scent now seemed to mock the anxiety rising in her chest. Tomorrow, she decided, setting the cup down with deliberate calm, she would return to the market. Perhaps another glimpse of the mountain man would help her understand why he'd become part of her story, and maybe, just maybe, why his eyes had seemed to reflect her own carefully guarded wariness. The mid-morning sun warmed Maren's shoulders as she walked along the outskirts of town. She needed to clear her head, to sort through the tangle of thoughts about her next steps. The gravel crunched beneath her feet as she rounded the corner past old Mrs. Weber's house. A car sat awkwardly angled in Mrs. Weber's driveway, its front wheel stuck in a muddy rut. The mountainman, the same one she'd kissed at the festival, was kneeling beside the wheel, carefully positioning wooden planks for traction. His movements were quick and precise, showing years of practical knowledge. Maren slowed her pace, studying him. His hands were weathered and calloused, his face tanned from outdoor work. Deep lines creased the corners of his eyes, speaking of both laughter and hardship. There was nothing particularly heroic about his appearance, just capability worn into every motion. "There you go, Mrs. Weber," he said, his voice low and steady. "Try it now." The elderly woman eased her foot onto the gas pedal, and the car rolled smoothly onto the wooden tracks. Two children watching from their yard quickly looked away when the man glanced in their direction. Maren found herself walking closer. "That was kind of you to help." He straightened up, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. "Owen Hale," he said simply, offering a slight nod. "Just doing what needs doing when I come to town." "I'm Maren," she replied, surprised by his directness. "I saw you at the festival." "Yes." His eyes met hers briefly. "You took your own kind of courage that night." Heat rose to Maren's cheeks, both embarrassment and an unexpected wash of gratitude. He wasn't judging her, just stating a fact. Mrs. Weber called out a thank you, and Owen's expression shifted slightly. "Haven't been much used to the town since the logging accident," he said quietly. "Lost more than just the mill that day." The weight of unspoken history hung in his words. Maren wanted to ask more, but his stance had already changed, turning slightly away. "Best be careful," he added, almost as an afterthought. Anton Blackwood has friends in the council. When pride gets hurt, some men don't stop until they've made someone pay. The warning sent a chill through Maren, despite the warm morning. She watched Owen walk away, his figure growing smaller against the tree line. The choice lay before her now. Reach out for help and risk exposure, or hide away and hope Anton's influence couldn't reach her. Back at the cabin that afternoon, Maren pulled out Pastor Ellen's list of contact numbers. Her hand hovered over the phone. Maybe there was a middle path, staying connected to the town, even to this mysterious Owen Hale, while being careful about whom to trust. The next 2 days unfolded in quiet moments that felt like gentle brushstrokes, painting a new kind of normal. Early Wednesday morning, Maren found a paper bag on the cabin's doorstep, dew still fresh on its sides, glistening like tiny diamonds in the soft morning light. Inside were basic groceries: bread, eggs, milk, and a jar of matches with a newly repaired striker strip, the edges sanded smooth with evident care. She recognized the careful handiwork, having watched Owen's calloused fingers help Mrs. Weber yesterday, the same patient attention to detail evident in both tasks. The kitchen latch, which had been sticking with a stubborn, rusty reluctance for days, now moved smoothly under her touch. She ran her fingers over the metal, noting how he'd filed down the rough edges and oiled the mechanism until it glided like a note sliding perfectly into place in a familiar melody. Such practical kindness brought unexpected tears to her eyes, small gestures speaking volumes in their silent eloquence. That afternoon, she ventured to the community center, drawn by the sounds of children practicing for the upcoming harvest festival, their young voices carrying through the open windows like scattered bird song. The piano was out of tune, certain keys striking discordant notes that made her wince inwardly. But her fingers found the melody anyway, muscle memory guiding them across the yellowed keys. "Would anyone like to learn the harmony?" she asked, before she could stop herself, the teacher in her responding instinctively to the potential she heard. 3 women who'd been arranging folding chairs in neat rows at the back of the room paused, exchanged glances, then smiled with unmistakable warmth. "We've missed having a proper choir director," said Beth Anderson, stepping forward with a hopeful expression, her gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "The children, too. Nobody's had the training to really help them." Soon, Maren had 6 voices working through amazing grace, teaching the parts with gentle persistence and occasional demonstrations. The familiar hymn filled the space, echoing against the community center's wooden beams. "Listen to each other," she encouraged, demonstrating the alto line with a clear, steady tone. "Let your voice blend, not compete. Feel how the harmonies support one another." The familiar role of teacher settled over her like a comfortable sweater pulled from the back of the closet, unexpected yet perfectly fitted to her shoulders. The next morning brought more evidence of Owen's quiet presence. A loose floorboard that had creaked with every step had been secured with neat, precise nails, and fresh kindling, split to exactly the right size, sat stacked by the wood stove in a tidy pyramid. Maren spent the day organizing sheet music she'd brought, humming softly to herself as her fingers sorted through pages worn soft with use, each piece triggering memories of choirs she'd led through the years. As evening approached, she returned from a walk, the scent of pine and wildflowers clinging to her clothes, to find Owen sitting on the cabin's front steps, 2 steaming cups of tea beside him on a small wooden tray. He nodded at the empty step beside him, an invitation without pressure. "Thank you for the groceries," Maren said, settling down, careful to maintain a respectful distance between them. "And the repairs. I noticed everything. Needed doing." He passed her a cup, his movements careful and deliberate, like someone accustomed to handling fragile things. Cabin deserves care. The tea was some kind of herbal blend, fragrant with what seemed like wild mint and something else, perhaps chamomile, that soothed her senses immediately. "Did you gather this yourself? It's lovely." Owen nodded, his gaze tracking the movement of a chickadee in a nearby pine. "Ridge has good foraging, if you know where to look. Berries coming in soon. Blackberries mostly. Sweet this year with all the rain." "Your cabin, is it very far up?" she ventured, sipping the warm, fragrant liquid. "Far enough." His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, not quite a smile but something gentler. "Built it myself, after." He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face, then added, "Good spot for carpentry work. Natural light. Town folks sometimes need things fixed. I manage." Maren wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat against her palms. "Is that why you came into town looking different? To stay anonymous while helping?" "Easier that way. Until recently." The ghost of a smile touched his face, briefly transforming his features. "Festival changed things some. Hard to hide when you're standing in plain sight." Heat rose to Maren's cheeks at the memory, but she noticed how he'd positioned himself, slightly turned toward her, but giving her clear space, no sudden movements or encroachments. Everything about him spoke of careful consideration, as if he understood boundaries better than most because his own had once been violated. That night, Maren slept deeply for the first time in weeks, without the usual startled awakenings or racing heart. The cabin felt safer somehow, knowing someone understood both hiding and healing, the delicate balance between needing space and craving connection. In the morning, she found herself humming as she made breakfast, the simple routines of measuring coffee and toasting bread taking on new meaning. These small moments, the anonymous kindnesses appearing like magic, the shared silence over tea that spoke volumes without demanding words, the joy of teaching music again and watching faces light up with understanding, began weaving themselves into something that felt almost like peace. Not complete safety, not yet, but a fragile trust was building, as delicate and precious as the first spring buds after winter, holding the promise of eventual bloom. The community center buzzed with a new energy that Wednesday afternoon. Maren stood at the piano, coaxing harmonies from a growing group of singers. The late summer light streamed through dusty windows, catching the hopeful faces before her. "Sopranos, let's try that measure again," she guided, playing the line. "Remember to support the sound from here." She gestured to her diaphragm. Lily, a young teenager with bright eyes and untamed enthusiasm, bounced on her toes. "Can I try the alto part, please?" She'd been showing up faithfully to every practice, her clear contralto voice a natural fit for the lower harmonies. "Of course." Maren smiled, playing the opening notes. The group's sound was starting to blend, rough edges smoothing into something beautiful. That weekend found Maren and Owen kneeling in the cabin's small herb garden, hands deep in dark soil. The earth felt cool and alive between her fingers as Owen showed her which plants to keep and which to gently remove. "Chamomile here," he explained, pointing to delicate white flowers. "Good for settling nerves. Lemon balm, too." His weathered hands moved with surprising gentleness among the plants. "Why do you garden?" Maren asked, watching him carefully transplant a fever-few seedling. Owen paused, considering. "Something about holding things steady," he said finally. "Plants need patience, time, like healing does." He looked at her briefly, understanding in his eyes. They worked in comfortable silence until the sun began to sink. Owen stood, brushing dirt from his knees, then hesitated. "There's something you should know." he said quietly. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a yellowed newspaper clipping, carefully folded. Marin took it with gentle hands. The headline read, "Hale Family Tragedy, 1998, above a black and white photo of a younger Owen, standing with a woman and small child. "Logging dispute went wrong," he said, voice rough. "Equipment failed. My wife Sarah and our daughter." He swallowed hard. Town needed someone to blame. I left before the whispers could hurt anyone else. Marin's heart ached at the guilt in his voice. She carefully refolded the clipping, handed it back. Without thinking, she began to hum softly, an old hymn about grace and redemption. Her fingers moved in the soil as she planted another row of chamomile, the melody carrying on the evening air. After a moment, a second voice joined hers, deep, uncertain at first, then growing stronger. Owen's baritone wove perfectly with her alto, their harmony rising in the golden light. The simple act of singing together felt intimate, holy almost. When the last note faded, Marin looked up to find Owen's expression transformed. Softer somehow, years of pain briefly eased. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deeper understanding taking root like the herbs they'd planted. They finished the garden in companionable silence, but the echo of their shared song lingered, as healing as the chamomile's gentle scent rising from the freshly turned earth. Monday morning brought a fierce storm that rattled windows and tore through the valley with unrelenting fury. Lightning split the dawn sky in jagged bursts of electric blue, followed by crashes of thunder that made the whole town jump and clutch at their chests. By sunrise, the Hendersons' fence lay scattered across their muddy pasture like broken matchsticks. Splintered wood spread in every direction as far as the eye could see. Marin watched from her kitchen window, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands, as Owen materialized through the misty morning like a figure from an old tale, toolbox in hand, his broad shoulders hunched slightly against the lingering drizzle. He worked methodically, his movements efficient and purposeful, showing 12-year-old Tommy Henderson how to hold nails steady and swing the hammer with purpose. The boy's eyes were wide with admiration as he followed Owen's every move. "See here," Owen's voice carried across the wet grass, gentle but firm. "You want to hit it straight on? Let the weight of the hammer do the work. Don't force it." Tommy's face scrunched in concentration as he copied Owen's movements, his tongue poking out slightly from the corner of his mouth, determination evident in his small frame. Mrs. Henderson, her cardigan pulled tight against the morning chill, tried to press a $20 bill into Owen's calloused hand when they finished, but he shook his head firmly. "Wood was spare from another job," he said simply, packing up his tools with the same care a musician might show their instrument. His eyes, Marin noticed, never lingered too long on anyone's face, a habit born of years avoiding scrutiny. The next afternoon, while golden sunlight replaced the storm's gloom, Lily perched on the community center steps, face bright as a new penny, as Owen read from a weather-worn copy of Treasure Island. His rough voice grew gentle with the story, the edges softening like river stones, and he paused often to answer her eager questions about pirates and treasure maps. Mrs. Granger, who usually kept her distance with a deliberately brisk pace, slowed her walk to listen, pretending to adjust her shopping bags while her ears caught every word. Later that same day, Marin spotted Owen sitting on a bench near the town square, teaching Lily to mend mittens with careful stitches. His large hands, more accustomed to hammers and saws, moved with surprising delicacy as he guided the child's fingers. Mrs. Granger watched from her porch across the street, rocking gently in her chair, her usually stern expression softening like butter in sunlight, as Owen showed the girl how to weave the colorful yarn through worn spots. "Well," Mrs. Granger remarked to her neighbor, Mrs. Collins, loud enough for the cluster of women gathering their mail to hear. "Seems there's more to him than meets the eye. Never thought I'd see the day when that mountain man would be teaching children to sew, of all things." On Wednesday, Marin organized a small gathering at the community center. Nothing fancy, just coffee and thanks for the choir's return. She arrived early, arranging chairs in comfortable circles rather than rigid rows. The old oak tables gleamed with polish, and the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the aroma of home-cooked dishes that began arriving one by one. Sarah Miller brought her famous green bean casserole topped with crispy fried onions, and the Peterson twins arrived with still warm apple pie, the cinnamon-scented steam rising like a blessing. The room hummed with quiet conversation and occasional bursts of laughter that rang against the rafters. Children darted between adult legs, playing impromptu games of tag. Marin felt warmth spread through her chest as she watched people mingle, sharing food and stories, leaning in close to hear soft-spoken words. This was what she'd missed during those isolated months with Anton. Real connection, genuine smiles that reached people's eyes, not the practiced social performances he'd demanded at his business functions. When Owen slipped in through the back door, trying to enter without drawing attention, conversation briefly stilled like a paused recording. He wore clean work clothes, faded but freshly laundered jeans and a flannel shirt buttoned to the collar, and had trimmed his beard into something less wild. He took a seat in the last row of chairs, nodding politely to those nearby, his posture suggesting he might bolt at any moment. Marin noticed the shift in the room, surprised glances that turned thoughtful, then welcoming as people resumed their conversations, now with occasional glances in his direction. "That man fixed my mother's porch steps last month," she overheard Mrs. Thompson telling her friend, voice carrying just enough to reach nearby ears. "Showed up after that bad freeze when the wood cracked. Wouldn't take a dime for it, just nodded when Mom offered him lemonade." From the counter where she arranged cookies on a floral patterned plate, Ellen Morrison, the hardware store owner, added, "He's rough around the edges, sure, but keeps his word. Always pays exact change, knows his tools, never has to ask twice about what kind of nails he needs." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words. "Not one for chit-chat, but he's helped more folks than most know." Marin watched the subtle transformation happening around her, like ice melting in spring. The same people who once whispered about the mysterious mountain man now passed him a plate of cookies, asked his opinion about winter weather predictions, treated him like a neighbor rather than a stranger. Small gestures, a touch on the shoulder, a saved seat, an offered napkin, spoke volumes about the community's changing heart. The afternoon light slanted through windows in golden bars, catching dust motes and the steam from coffee cups in ethereal displays. Lily had claimed the chair next to Owen, her small frame practically vibrating with excitement as she showed him her school art project, a collage of forest animals. His quiet attention to her explanation, the way he pointed to specific details with genuine interest, made several mothers exchange approving looks and whispered comments. For Marin, watching from beside the coffee urn, the scene felt like a gentle revelation unfolding in real time. This was community at its best, not the artificial politeness she'd endured with Anton, where every smile felt calculated, but genuine warmth built on small kindnesses and growing trust. She caught Owen's eye across the room and smiled, a simple gesture loaded with unspoken understanding, receiving a slight nod in return that somehow conveyed more than words could have. The knot of anxiety she'd carried for months, tight as a fist beneath her ribs, loosened just a bit more, allowing her to breathe more deeply than she had in years. Sarah meant well when she posted the festival photos on Facebook. Summer memories. Maple Bridge moments. The image showed laughing children around the popcorn stand, But there in the background, clear as day, stood Marin near the gazebo. The timestamp placed it minutes before everything changed. Marin's phone buzzed with the notification. Her stomach dropped when she saw Anton had already commented. "Lovely evening. Some people forget what community really means." By noon, Anton's lawyer, Richard Bennett, had filed papers at the courthouse. Marin learned about it from Pastor Ellen, who called with worry in her voice. "He's claiming damages to his reputation," Ellen explained. "Richard Bennett stopped by after service to let me know, as if that wasn't a threat in itself." Bennett's smooth voice had already made its way around town. "We'll make this tidy in court," he'd told the clerk, loud enough for others to hear. "Sometimes people need legal guidance to do the right thing." The next morning, Anton walked into the mayor's office wearing his best suit and practiced smile. Through the window, Marin watched him shake hands with council members, laughing at their jokes. But his eyes were cold. Sheriff Davies pulled up to the cabin that afternoon in his official vehicle, looking uncomfortable in his pressed uniform. He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "Miss Albright," he said, "there's been some concern about recent events. If you could come down to the station, clear things up." He trailed off, not meeting her eyes. Marin stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Am I under arrest, Sheriff?" No, he said quickly. "Just trying to keep peace in the community. You understand how these things look." She understood perfectly. The sheriff served at the pleasure of the town council, and Anton had friends there. Through the day, more messages arrived. A note from Anton's secretary. "Mr. Albright hopes you'll make the right choice, Marin." A call from his business partner suggesting she think about the choir's reputation. The panic she'd kept at bay began creeping back. Her hands shook as she made tea, remembering how Anton could make threats sound like concern. Owen appeared at dusk with firewood and fresh vegetables from his garden. He stacked the wood carefully, checked the locks on her windows. But when she mentioned fighting the legal claims, he grew quiet. "I can't be what brings more trouble," he said softly. "The town's barely accepting me as it is." "But you know what he's doing isn't right," Marin protested. Owen's weathered face showed pain. "Sometimes fighting makes things worse. I learned that lesson." That night, Marin heard footsteps on the porch. In the morning, she found a note pushed under her door. The handwriting was disguised, but the message was clear. "Leave Maplebridge. Some stories shouldn't be told." She sat at her small table, the note trembling in her hands, as morning light crept across the floor. The peaceful routine she'd built over the past weeks felt suddenly fragile, like frost on a window. One touch, and it would shatter. The church basement hummed with quiet determination. Pastor Ellen had gathered a dozen neighbors around the folding tables, choir members, shopkeepers, even Mrs. Granger with her influential presence. They passed around a lined notepad, signing their names with steady hands. "We're here because truth matters," Pastor Ellen said simply, "and because neighbors protect neighbors." Lily's mother, Sarah, spoke up first. "I saw how he treated her at choir practice, the way he'd show up, watching, controlling everything." Others nodded, adding their own observations. The petition grew longer, filled with specific dates and incidents. That afternoon, Marin sat across from Catherine Mills, a legal aid attorney Pastor Ellen had contacted. The office was small but neat, with sunlight streaming through dusty blinds. "Tell me everything," Catherine said, spreading a yellow notepad on her desk. "And show me what evidence you have." Marin's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. "I started saving the voicemails last year," she explained. I knew someday I might need them." She pressed play. Anton's voice filled the small office. "Where are you? You know how this looks when you're late." The choir is my project, too. Don't think you can just make decisions. If you ever try to leave, well, you know what's at stake." Catherine took careful notes, her expression professional but kind. "These are important," she said, "and the witness is willing to speak. That's crucial. But we need more. Someone who can verify your timeline, especially around the festival." Marin thought of Owen, who had been watching from the shadows all those months, but he had already declined to get involved, fear of exposure etched in his face. The next day, the petition circulated through town. Choir members added their signatures. Mrs. Granger's husband, a retired judge, offered a written statement about Anton's business practices. Up on Laurel Ridge, Owen stood at his cabin window, watching the valley below. The town's lights winked on as dusk settled. He held the old newspaper clipping about the logging accident, fingers tracing the yellowed edges. Shame and love warred in his chest. Shame for his past, for hiding all these years. But love, not just for Marin, but for the truth itself, kept pushing through like spring grass through snow. He remembered Marin's voice blending with his that day in the garden. How the harmony had felt like coming home. The next morning, Owen walked down to the caretaker's cabin before sunrise. He found Marin on the porch with her morning tea. "I'll testify," he said simply. "I was there. I saw how he acted at the festival, and before. I can confirm the dates, the incidents." Marin set down her cup, hands unsteady. "But your privacy, your peace up here." "Some things matter more than hiding," Owen said. His voice was rough but certain. "I've been watching this town a long time, seen how he operates. Maybe it's time someone stood up and said so." Marin reached out and squeezed his calloused hand. Around them, birds began their morning songs, and the sun touched the tops of the trees. For the first time since the festival, she felt the full weight of community behind her. Not just supporters signing a petition, but deep, unshakable friendship standing guard against the darkness. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of whispers and watchful eyes. Afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished oak floor where Anton sat in the front row, his charcoal suit meticulously pressed and his smile carefully practiced. His manicured fingers tapped rhythmically against his knee, the only visible sign of his inner tension. Behind him, row after row filled with familiar faces, shopkeepers with worried expressions, choir members huddled together for support, farmers in their freshly ironed Sunday shirts, collars stiff against weathered necks. The old ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, barely, stirring the thick air of anticipation that hung in the room. Everyone knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a public reckoning that would reshape their quiet community. Marin's hands twisted in her lap, her knuckles white against the pale blue of her modest dress. She could feel the weight of stares on her back, some sympathetic, others questioning, all curious. Catherine Mills, her lawyer, arranged papers on the desk with methodical precision, the shuffle of documents the only sound besides the occasional cough from the gallery. The visiting magistrate from the county seat, a silver-haired man with kind eyes but a stern mouth, adjusted his reading glasses and rapped his gavel, calling the hearing to order with a resonance that silenced even the softest whispers. "First exhibit," Catherine announced, her voice clear and confident as she held up Marin's phone like it contained sacred evidence. "Voice messages from the defendant, recorded over the past 6 months." The technician pressed play, and Anton's recorded voice filled the hall, bouncing off the high ceiling. "You're nothing without me, Marin. Nothing. The choir, the house, your reputation in this town, I can take it all away with a single phone call. Remember that." Marin flinched at the sound, her eyes briefly closing as the memory washed over her. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Another message played, the tone silkier, but no less menacing. Don't think you can just walk away after all these years. Everything you have, everything you are, belongs here, with me. People don't leave me, Marin. They just don't. Mrs. Granger took the stand next, her gray hair neatly pinned back, her sensible shoes planted firmly on the floor. She testified about Anton's controlling behavior at choir practice, how he would interrupt Marin's instructions, dismiss her musical choices, and once reduced her to tears by criticizing her arrangement of an Easter hymn in front of the entire choir. He'd wait until everyone was watching, Mrs. Granger explained, her mouth set in a firm line. Then he'd tear her down piece by piece, always with that smile of his, like he was doing her a favor. Sarah, the young waitress from the diner, spoke about the times she'd seen Marin trembling after Anton's visits, how she'd hide in the kitchen until she could compose herself. She'd jump at the slightest noise, Sarah said softly. Once dropped a whole tray of dishes when the door slammed. I've never seen anyone look so scared. One by one, each witness added another piece to the pattern, building a mosaic of manipulation and fear that even Anton's most loyal supporters couldn't ignore. The evidence mounted like the storm clouds gathering outside the tall windows. When Owen finally took the stand, the room fell into a deeper silence. His work clothes were clean but visibly worn, his broad shoulders straight despite the obvious discomfort of being so publicly exposed. His hands, rough and calloused from years of honest labor, rested on the wooden rail. He spoke quietly but firmly, his deep voice carrying easily through the hushed room. Yes, I've been living on Laurel Ridge these past years. After the logging accident, I chose exile rather than face the rumors and the blame. But I never truly left this community, he admitted, his eyes briefly scanning the faces he'd avoided for so long. I kept watching this town, coming down when needed, helping where I could without being seen. He looked directly at the judge then, his gaze unwavering. I've seen how Anton Blackwood operates, how he uses influence and fear to keep people in line. The night of the festival, I saw genuine terror in Marin's eyes, the kind no woman should ever feel. Thunder rumbled in the distance, an appropriate backdrop to Owen's testimony, as he continued with simple, honest words that carried more weight than Anton's polished rhetoric ever could. I know what it's like to be driven away by someone's power, to feel trapped by their version of events, to have your truth buried under convenient stories. Marin showed real courage that night, walking away from everything familiar. She deserves to live without fear, to rebuild her life on her own terms. The judge listened attentively, making occasional notes in a leather-bound notebook. When all testimony concluded, he removed his glasses, polished them thoughtfully with a handkerchief, and finally spoke in measured tones. Based on the evidence and testimony presented today, I'm granting the protective order in full. Furthermore, Mr. Blackwood's harassment claim is dismissed with prejudice. Anton's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his carefully maintained facade, but his voice remained smooth as honey when he stood. Your Honor, I simply wanted to protect the reputation of our town, our traditions, our way of life. The town's reputation, the judge replied firmly, replacing his glasses and looking directly at Anton, is best served by justice, Mr. Blackwood, not by silencing those who seek safety. The gavel came down with finality, echoing through the suddenly buzzing room. As people filed out, some lingering to offer quiet words of support to Marin, others hurrying to avoid taking sides, the storm finally broke in earnest. Rain lashed against the windows like angry fingers, and wind howled through the ancient oak trees lining the square. Marin and Owen slipped out a side door, heads bent against the deluge as they hurried to his weathered truck. They drove carefully toward the cabin, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the sheets of water cascading down the glass. Lightning illuminated the forest in brief, electric flashes, revealing glistening leaves and bending branches. But halfway there, they found their path blocked by a massive fallen oak, its roots torn from the saturated earth, its crown stretching across both lanes. "We'll have to wait it out at the cabin," Owen said, carefully turning the truck around on the narrow road. "The road crew can't work in this. Not safely." His hand briefly touched hers, a reassuring gesture, gentle and undemanding. Inside the cabin, they dried off by the crackling wood stove. Owen built up the fire with practiced movements, adding split logs from the neat stack by the hearth, while Maren found thick candles in the kitchen drawer and placed them strategically around the room in case the power failed. The cabin smelled of pine and wood smoke, with undertones of coffee and the faint sweetness of the wildflowers Owen had placed in a jam jar on the windowsill. Together they assembled a simple meal from what was on hand: vegetable soup warmed on the cast-iron stove, crusty homemade bread that Owen had baked the previous day, tea steeped in mismatched mugs that steamed between their hands. The wind rattled the windows, but inside was all warmth and unexpected peace. "I haven't shared a meal with anyone in years," Owen admitted softly, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "Not like this. Not sitting across from someone, talking." Maren reached for her old hymnal, its leather binding soft with decades of use, its pages dog-eared and marked with penciled notes. "Music always helped me feel less alone," she said, her fingers tracing the embossed title. "Even when I couldn't sing out loud, I could hear the melodies in my head." They sat close on the small couch, shoulders touching as they leafed through familiar songs, their voices blending first in conversation, then in quiet harmony. Outside, the storm raged with undiminished fury. "This one," Owen said, pointing to an old favorite, his finger gentle against the yellowed page. His voice was rough but true as they sang together, the harmony rising above the storm's rage, filling the cabin with something beautiful and new. Maren's clear soprano complemented Owen's baritone perfectly, as though they'd been singing together all their lives instead of just this once. When the last note faded, leaving only the sound of rain and crackling fire, Maren turned to face him. Their fingers had somehow entwined during the song, natural as breathing. Owen's eyes held questions, hope, and patience, waiting for her lead. "Thank you," Maren whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, "for standing up today, for being here now, for everything." "Thank you for showing me it was time to stop hiding," he replied simply, the firelight casting gentle shadows across his weathered face. "For bringing music back into my life." Their first kiss was gentle, unhurried, a tentative exploration rather than a passionate claim. Owen's calloused hand cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness, as though she were made of precious glass. When they drew apart, Maren rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in peaceful silence as the storm continued its assault outside. Neither felt the need to fill the quiet with unnecessary words. The rain drummed, steadily on the roof, but inside the cabin was warm and still, a sanctuary against both literal and figurative storms. They shared more songs as the evening deepened, their voices gaining confidence with each hymn. They exchanged quiet conversation about simple things, favorite seasons, childhood memories, dreams long deferred, but perhaps not entirely forgotten. Between words came more soft kisses, each one a little more certain than the last. As night settled fully over the mountain, the storm gradually spent its fury. The rain gentled to a soft patter, almost musical in its rhythm. There was no rush, no pressure, just the sweet certainty of two people who had finally found their way home. Not to a place, but to each other. The morning paper lay innocently on the cabin's front step, damp with dew. Marin's coffee turned bitter in her mouth as she read the editorial, prominently placed on page 2. Mountain Man's motives questioned by a concerned citizen. Our small town has always valued truth and decency. Recent events force us to question whether we've been manipulated by a carefully crafted performance. The so-called Mountain Man emerged conveniently when a vulnerable woman needed rescue. His dramatic testimony yesterday seemed designed to play on our emotions. But what do we really know about Owen Hale's past? About his true intentions? The words twisted like snakes on the page. Marin's hands shook as she read further. Sources close to the situation suggest this could be an elaborate scheme to restore his reputation. Are we being used as pawns in someone's bid for redemption? By mid-morning, the damage was spreading. Mrs. Henderson from the quilting circle called to say she wouldn't be attending choir practice, under the circumstances. The casserole dish Betty had brought yesterday appeared on the porch, empty and scrubbed clean, a clear message. At the market, Marin overheard 2 women whispering, "Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Coming down from that ridge right when she needed help." Owen appeared at the cabin door just after lunch, his face carved from stone. "I saw the paper," he said quietly. "It's lies," Marin said. "We can fight this. I fought rumors before, they only grow stronger." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I need some time, to think. Owen, please. I'll be at my cabin." He turned away, shoulders rigid. "It's better this way." Marin watched him stride toward the ridge trail, each step taking him further away. The familiar cold fear crept in. Abandonment, isolation, the pattern repeating. She pressed her hands against the doorframe until they hurt. No, this time would be different. She pulled her hiking boots from under the bed and found her small backpack. Water bottle, flashlight, granola bars. Her hands moved with purpose. The trail to Owen's cabin wasn't marked on any map, but she'd heard enough stories. Follow the ridgeline north, past the lightning-struck oak. The afternoon sun filtered through, autumn leaves as Marin started climbing. Her boots crunched on fallen acorns, and somewhere a woodpecker tapped out a steady rhythm. The path grew steeper, less defined. Sweat dampened her shirt despite the cool air. She paused to catch her breath, leaning against a moss-covered boulder. Below, the town looked like a child's toy village. Up ahead, the ridge disappeared into stands of pine and oak. Owen was up there, probably believing he was protecting her by withdrawing. Well, she wasn't going to let fear, his or hers, make this decision. She adjusted her pack and kept climbing. Wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of pine needles and distant rain. Each step felt like a choice, a declaration. She would not be driven away from love by anonymous accusations. The trail grew rougher, but Marin kept moving. This wasn't like running from Anton. This was running toward something true, something worth fighting for. She'd lived too long letting other people's words shape her choices. A hawk circled overhead, riding the afternoon thermals. Marin wiped sweat from her forehead and checked her water bottle. The ridge trail stretched ahead, winding through stands of weathered trees. Somewhere up there, Owen was trying to protect them both by retreating into solitude. But solitude wasn't the answer anymore. Not for him. Not for her. They'd both hidden long enough. The sun hung low when Marin finally reached Owen's cabin. It was smaller than she'd imagined, a weathered structure built into the ridge itself, with a metal roof and rough-hewn walls. Smoke wisped from the stone chimney. Her knock echoed hollow. After a long moment, Owen opened the door, his expression carefully blank. "You shouldn't have climbed up here," he said. "You shouldn't have run." Marin's legs trembled from the ascent, but she held his gaze. He stepped aside wordlessly, letting her enter. The cabin's interior was spare but tidy. A wood stove, a narrow bed, shelves lined with books and jars. A coffee pot simmered on the stove. "Betty returned her casserole dish today," Marin said, her voice tight. "Scrubbed clean like she was afraid of contamination. And Mrs. Henderson, she whispered to her friend at the market that you were too convenient to be trusted." Owen's shoulders stiffened. "That's why I left." "No, that's why you should stay and fight. You don't understand what it was like before." Owen's hands clenched. "The accident. I was supervising that day. The safety equipment failed. My wife Sarah came to bring lunch, had our daughter Emily with her. The load shifted." His voice cracked. Marin waited. "2 deaths. My fault. The company blamed faulty equipment, but people needed someone to hate. The whispers started. Parents crossed the street when they saw me coming. Notes in my mailbox saying I had blood on my hands. But you left instead of defending yourself. I thought it would be easier for everyone. The gossip would die if I wasn't there to feed it." Owen poured coffee with shaking hands. "Now it's starting again. They'll use me to hurt you." Marin took the cup he offered. "Your testimony yesterday meant everything. It showed people that standing up matters more than staying safe. And now they're twisting it." Bitterness edged his words, making it sound calculated. "Then we show them it's not." Marin set down her coffee. "Pastor Ellen is planning a community healing service this Sunday. Come with me. Not as the mysterious mountain man, just as Owen, a neighbor who's been here all along." He shook his head. "I can't be a spectacle." "You won't be. We'll do it quietly. No dramatic gestures. Just be present, sing the hymns, share the peace." She touched his arm. "Let people see you as human." Owen was silent for a long time, staring out the small window at the darkening sky. Finally, he turned back to her. "I'll need time," he said, "to adjust to being seen again, to weather the stares and whispers." "We have time." Marin squeezed his hand. "Pastor Ellen and I will help. Small steps, on your terms." He nodded slowly. "Sunday, then. But I'll sit in the back." "That's enough," Marin smiled. "That's a beginning." They sat together as dusk settled over the ridge, planning careful steps toward healing, both his and the town's. The coffee grew cold between them, but neither noticed, too focused on mapping a gentle path back to community. The morning light painted long shadows across Marin's kitchen table as she spread out her lists. 3 days to prepare, to heal decades of whispers. She picked up her phone and began dialing choir members. Sarah picked up first. "We'll be there," she said without hesitation. "All 4 of us." By noon, Pastor Ellen had visited 6 homes, carrying her special blend of tea and quiet conviction. Mrs. Henderson, who'd whispered doubts just days ago, dabbed her eyes and promised to bring cookies. "Perhaps we've all been too quick to judge," she admitted. The attorney, Lisa Martinez, prepared simple statements about truth and reconciliation. "No legal language," she insisted. "Just human words." On the second day, Marin walked the familiar path to Mrs. Granger's white colonial house. The old woman answered her knock with raised eyebrows. "I remember that night," Mrs. Granger said, settling into her armchair. "When my Tommy got lost in that storm. 8 years old, wandered off chasing his dog. Owen found him, carried him 2 miles through the snow." She twisted her wedding ring. "Funny how we forget the good when fear takes hold." "Will you come?" Marin asked. Mrs. Granger nodded slowly. Someone ought to speak truth. The third day brought unexpected allies. The hardware store owner remembered Owen fixing his delivery truck one winter morning, refusing payment. The librarian recalled books returned with careful repairs to torn pages. Each memory built a bridge. On Sunday morning, Maren helped arrange folding chairs in neat rows before the Aidsu gazebo. Summer flowers brightened the small table where ceramic teapots waited. Hymnals lay open to Amazing Grace. People arrived in twos and threes, tentative at first. Pastor Ellen stood to welcome them, her voice warm and steady. "We gather to speak truth and seek mercy," she began, "to remember that every person carries both wounds and wisdom." Maren's hands trembled slightly as she rose to speak next. She'd practiced her words carefully, wanting them measured and clear. "Thank you all for coming," she said. "We're here to see each other whole, not as rumors or mistakes, but as neighbors who've shared this town's life. I'm especially grateful to Owen Hale, whose courage helped me find my own." Owen sat near the back, wearing clean work clothes, his face weathered but calm. When Pastor Ellen invited him to stand, he did so without fanfare. Mrs. Granger cleared her throat. "I need to say something." She turned to face the gathering. 8 years ago, my grandson Tommy would have died in that blizzard if Owen hadn't found him. He tracked that boy through whiteout conditions, followed a half-buried mitten to where Tommy had huddled under a fallen pine. Carried him home with frost-bitten hands. The silence held weight. Then someone else spoke up. The baker remembered Owen leaving bread for widowed Mrs. Chen every Sunday for a year. Another recalled him fixing the church roof after a storm, working through the night. "We were wrong," Mrs. Henderson said softly. "About so many things." Pastor Ellen poured tea as people shared more memories, each story washing away old stains of gossip. Owen accepted the words with quiet dignity, neither defending nor explaining. Maren watched faces soften, shoulders relax. No grand gestures, just neighbors choosing compassion over fear, truth over comfortable silence. The healing service ended with Amazing Grace, voices joining verse by verse until the harmony filled the gazebo and spilled into the summer air. Owen's deep bass anchored the final chorus, steady and sure. The morning after the healing service, Maren's email inbox chimed steadily. "Your bravery changed minds," wrote the third-grade teacher. "We should have spoken up sooner," said another. By afternoon, her porch held 3 casseroles and a handmade quilt. Mrs. Granger stopped by with fresh-baked bread. "The grandkids want to join your choir program," she said, settling into a kitchen chair. "Tommy especially." Owen worked quietly in the background, his hands steady as he repaired the loose porch step. Neighbors who once hurried past now paused to chat, asking about his woodworking techniques or sharing memories of his past kindnesses. On day 3, Anton made his last stand. The sheriff's phone rang twice before breakfast. "Ma'am," the sheriff told Maren later, looking uncomfortable on her doorstep. "He's pushing for harassment charges, but..." He shifted his weight. "Well, the evidence doesn't support it, and folks have been calling in, sharing what they know." Pastor Ellen and the town attorney met over coffee to draft responses. "His claims are baseless," Lisa Martinez explained, spreading papers across the church office desk. "We have documented patterns of his behavior, witness statements, those voicemails." Anton's own lawyer finally pulled him aside at the courthouse. Their conversation carried through the open window, careful words about limiting exposure and cutting losses. That evening, Owen found Anton's car at the Mountain View Motel. "He's checking out," he told Maren softly. "Sometimes leaving quiet is the only dignity left." 2 weeks later, a small notice appeared in the courthouse records. Anton's house listed for sale, his business transferred to a partner in the next county. No dramatic exit, just a gradual fading away. Maren threw herself into planning the hospice choir. "Music reaches places words can't," she explained to the hospital board. "We'll sing for anyone who needs it." 10 volunteers signed up the first day. Owen sketched designs for trail benches, simple but sturdy. "The kids need somewhere to rest when they hike," he said, showing Maren his plans, "and I can teach them basic carpentry while we build." They worked together in the late afternoons, expanding the herb garden. Lavender for peace, rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage. Each plant a small act of faith in staying. "This one's the last," Owen said on day 7, holding a smooth river stone. They'd gathered it from the creek that morning, letting the water polish away rough edges. Maren nestled it into place at the garden's heart. Their hands met in the warm soil, fingers intertwining like roots seeking depth. Not an ending, but a beginning, as natural as seeds taking hold in fertile ground. The evening sun painted long shadows across their work. New benches waiting for young hikers, herbs reaching toward light, a stone anchoring it all. Tomorrow would bring choir practice, woodshop classes, more neighbors stopping to share stories. But tonight, they simply sat together on the porch steps, watching darkness soften the ridge they both now called home. 6 months after the hearing, Frost painted the community center windows as Maren arranged sheet music on metal stands. The hospice choir gathered every Wednesday morning, filling the room with gentle harmonies and the scent of coffee from dented thermoses. "Let's warm up," Maren said, her fingers finding familiar chords on the old upright piano. 15 volunteers, some from her original choir, others new faces, stood in a loose circle. Margaret, 83, and sporting a bright purple sweater, beamed as she hit the high notes. They practiced hymns and folk songs, the kind that brought comfort to hospital rooms and nursing homes. Last week they'd sung for Mr. Peterson as he drifted between sleep and waking, his daughter holding his hand. The music had smoothed his furrowed brow, giving voice to what words couldn't reach. Through the window, Maren spotted Owen leading 6 teenagers up the ridge trail, tool belts hanging from their hips. He'd taught them to read grain patterns in wood, to measure twice and cut once. The new bench at Laurel Point bore their careful craftsmanship and a small brass plaque. "For those who choose kindness, built by Maplebridge Youth Trail crew." During lunch break, Owen left a thermos of hot soup on her desk, their daily ritual. She'd pack him sandwiches wrapped in brown paper, tucking in sprigs of fresh herbs from their garden. Their love spoke through these quiet gestures, a repaired kettle appearing on her counter, sheet music organized on his workbench. 3 months after the healing service, the town's rhythms had shifted. At the general store, conversations flowed easily around community projects, rather than whispered gossip. The festival committee had approached Maren last week about directing the holiday choir. "We missed your touch with the music," Mrs. Granger said, adjusting her reading glasses. "The children especially." Even Anton's name had lost its power. His former business partner had transformed the accounting firm, hiring local college graduates and sponsoring Little League teams. The few times someone mentioned Anton, it was with the distant tone reserved for half-forgotten storms. The Ridge Trail saw steady traffic now. Families hiked on weekends, resting on Owen's benches. Children collected pine cones and learned the names of birds. The path to his cabin, once overgrown, stayed clear from regular use. That afternoon, as Maren gathered her music sheets, she found a note from one of the hospice patients' families. "Your songs gave Mom peace in her final hours. Thank you for bringing beauty when we needed it most." She tucked the note into her folder beside others, small testaments to the power of presence, of choosing to stay and rebuild. Through the window, she watched Owen demonstrating proper sanding technique to his young apprentices, his patience as steady as the mountains themselves. This was their victory, not in grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet work of making space for healing. Every Wednesday song, Every wooden bench, every shared meal formed another thread in the tapestry of their rebuilt life. The autumn light slanted golden through the windows as choir members gathered their belongings, making plans for next week's hospital visits. Outside, the trail crew's laughter echoed down the ridge, punctuated by the steady rhythm of hammers shaping something new. The late summer sun warmed the festival grounds just as it had 1 year ago, but everything else had changed. Red and gold bunting fluttered between lamp posts, and the scent of kettle corn drifted on the breeze. Children darted between craft booths while parents balanced paper plates of pie. Marin's fingers intertwined with Owen's as they walked past the gazebo where that desperate kiss had sparked their story. Her heart felt steady now, grounded in the kind of love that grows from truth rather than fear. Ready for the performance? Owen squeezed her hand. More than ready, she smiled, noticing how naturally people nodded and waved to them both. The choir assembled on the gazebo steps, their blue folders catching the afternoon light. Marin lifted her hands, and the first notes of Amazing Grace rose clear and strong. She caught glimpses of familiar faces in the crowd, the hospice volunteers, Owen's trail crew teenagers, Mrs. Peterson dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. When the final chord faded, genuine applause rippled through the gathering. Mrs. Granger approached them afterward, her practical shoes crunching on the gravel path. She held out a mason jar filled with deep red preserves. My grandmother's recipe, she said, her usual brisk tone softened. For both of you, what you did, standing up for truth, helping rebuild trust, well, it matters more than I can say. Pastor Ellen joined them, her eyes bright. In a world that's quick to judge, you chose patience and grace, she said, raising her hands in a gentle benediction. May we all remember that second chances are sacred gifts. Near the lemonade stand, Owen sat with Frank Thompson, the farmer whose fence he'd repaired during last spring's storm. They shared a plate of cornbread, laughing about the time Owen's ancient truck got stuck in mud while delivering lumber for the youth center. Tell us about the bear cub, Mr. Owen. Little Sarah tugged at his sleeve, and soon a small crowd of children gathered to hear the story of how he'd helped a lost cub find its way back to its mother on the ridge. As the festival wound down, Marin and Owen stood beside a freshly dug hole near the community center's entrance. Together, they lowered a young maple sapling into the earth, its leaves already turning gold at the edges. Pastor Ellen had suggested the planting as a symbol of renewal, but it felt more like a promise to stay, to grow, to keep choosing love over fear. Neighbors paused to add handfuls of soil around the roots. Mrs. Granger brought water from the well. The teenagers from Owen's crew carefully spread mulch in a perfect circle. Looks like it's already home, Owen said softly, brushing dirt from his hands. Marin watched the sapling's leaves dance in the evening breeze, remembering how she'd once fled this place in terror. Now she saw the truth. Healing happened not in dramatic moments, but in daily choices, to trust, to forgive, to begin again. The festival lights blinked on as dusk settled over Maple Bridge. Children played tag between the booths, while parents packed up picnic blankets. Through it all, the young maple stood straight and strong, its roots reaching deep into soil made richer by the very community that had learned to see with new eyes. When neighbors chose to see each other whole, past their fears and failures to the truth beneath, Maple Bridge had discovered how to heal. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.